Hello everyone, welcome to our April Money Clinic live stream. I'm Rachel, one of the Client Success Managers here at Salary Finance, and this is Jason Butler, our Head of Financial Education and Personal Finance Guru. Today we're going to talk about money personalities and how to develop better habits with those in mind. There's a Slido QR code here on screen. We're going to be answering all your questions. You can upvote the ones you really want answered throughout the session. And if you can't use this QR code, there's the Slido website and the session code just there as well. Before we get started, do have to say that this is not personal financial advice. It is generic in nature, this presentation. If you do need personal financial advice, please seek out a regulated financial independent advisor, or seek out the Money Helper Service or your local Citizens Advice Bureau. How are you today, Jason?
Great. This is our third session. We've had a lot of engagement from previous audiences, so we set the bar quite high. We've had some fantastic questions, and we're answering them all the way as we go through. We're not waiting to the end, so we'll, the sooner people put the questions in, the sooner we'll answer them. And we've got some interesting polls, which I'm really looking forward to seeing how they compare to the previous sessions.
And with that in mind, we'll go to the first one. So we want to know, how do you feel about your money situation? Are you quite optimistic about it? Are you cautiously optimistic? Are you slightly worried? You're neutral about it? You're not sure if it's here nor there? Or you're slightly worried, or you're really worried? Now this has gone up and down throughout the day.
It's interesting because how you feel about your situation is not necessarily linked to the reality of the situation. And I think the key point to think about with this is that how we feel is a product of pretty much our wiring. So we're going to talk about financial personalities because it's not so much what happens to you in life, it's how you react to it. And how you react to it is in a large part influenced by your personality type, but it's also affected by your emotions and your moods and how you interpret things. So what someone thinks is an opportunity, someone else thinks is a problem. What someone else thinks is a mild issue, for someone else would be a calamity. So that's quite interesting. So here we go. So we got slightly worried is the main one, closely followed by cautiously optimistic, neutral, slightly worried. Heavily, was it really worried is 8%, very optimistic, 4%. That's interesting. So it seems to me that we've got a mixture. The majority of people either slightly worried or cautiously optimistic. So that's fine. But it's nice to see how people are compared to everyone else. So wherever you are, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. It's great to get a little test of the situation here. Now, let's talk about what we mean by financial sort of money personality. We all come out of the womb with a certain wiring. So obviously we know about, for instance, introvert, extrovert. We know about big picture, small sort of detail, people who are touchy-feely versus people who are sort of a more abstract. And that wiring that you come out of the operating system, as it were, is then overlaid with other things, which we explain. But what that means is that we all act, react, think about, deal with, make decisions differently, depending on that innate personality. And the key to being financially well in wherever you are in life, whatever that means to you, is the more you know about yourself, the better you can develop the right habits, behaviours and decisions and coping mechanisms as well with your money. So that's the key thing. And here's the thing, I can say now I'm 55 next week, right? I know you don't believe it, but anyway, the point here is as you age, as you go through life and you experience life, how you deal with money changes. Well, some people it doesn't, but many of us it does. It evolves because we see things through a different lens. So let's just think about this. So if we take the innate wiring of your personality, we then overlay that with the beliefs, the things that you've learned as you've grown up. My mum used to say, money doesn't grow on trees. Do you think I'm made of money? So my mum was very much a scarcity mentality, and she sort of created that sense of anxiety in me. And then there's your emotions. Now, some people are very, very emotional. Some people are very unemotional. Some people can become emotional if a traumatic event happens. So you have a relationship breakdown or a grief or divorce or something like that. And so beliefs and emotions on top of your innate personality forms your identity. And your identity very much underpins the habits, behaviours and decisions about money. So we do stuff that is a vote to reinforce who we believe we are. So if our identity is out of date or not helpful, it can mean that we do destructive or sabotaging behaviours. Now, this is one of my favourite series of action films, Rachel, as you well know, The Bourne Identity. Absolutely fantastic series of films. If you've not seen it, highly recommend it. Basically, he woke up not knowing, Jason Bourne, basically didn't know who he was. And the whole series of films is about him learning who he is. And basically, he's a CIA operative with multiple personalities, multiple identities. But the key thing is if you don't know who you are, and you're not aware of who you are, and also we're going to touch on this, you don't understand your partner if you have one, or you're completely different and you're not pulling in the same direction, it can be a recipe for disaster. But also, it can be a source of strength. Now, F.M. Alexander, who developed the thing called the Alexander technique, you can Google that in your own time, he actually made this statement some years ago, I think in the 50s or 60s. He said, people do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their future. So in other words, what you do on a day-to-day basis is a vote for the person you believe you are or you want to become. And if that's helpful, that's great. And if it's not helpful, it's not so great. The point here is you've got to decide the habits. But the habits are influenced by your hardwiring, and they can be adapted. Now, a good friend of mine is Claire Barrett, who is the consumer editor at the Financial Times. She used to be a head of personal finance at the Financial Times, and wrote actually the introduction to my book, Money Moments. And she has written a brilliant book called What They Don't Teach You About Money. It really is good. It's a really simple read. Can't recommend it highly enough. There's an audio version and there's a digital as well. But what Claire says really in the book, and I've worked with her many years, so I know her well, what she says is this thing about which financial personality reflects your money habits. So in other words, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like, understanding your personality type is the key, I think, to really getting ahead with money. And she actually came up with 5. Now, there are people who've written about financial personalities, money personalities. I've come up with 9, 12, 15 types of people. Too many. What I like about Claire's sort of framework is there are only 5. Now, we all display aspects of this in our personality and in our decisions and habits and behaviours. But we, generally speaking, will identify more strongly with one of them than the other. And it might change over time. So let's just quickly whiz through them. And I'm going to ask you, as I'm saying them, I'm going to explain them after this, but the first poll is going to be asking people which one they think they are. So either a spendy Wendy, the gobbling, the jitterbug, the spreadsheet slave, or the ostrich. Now, vote away, please. Put down who you think. I'm going to explain them all to you, so you know. And please do get your questions in, because we're going to answer those as well. Now, I think, Rachel, you relate to one of these a bit more, well, a couple of these a bit more than the others, don't you?
Well, I definitely flicker between being a spreadsheet slave and a spendy Wendy, because I like to see my budget laid out for the month. And then I'll forget about it about 3 days into the month and just go, oh, that looks pretty. Or, you know, something comes up and I just turn into a bit of a spendy Wendy. And yeah, it's really tough to kind of decide on which one you are, because not everyone's going to be like one specific one of these.
Yeah, there'll be one that is more dominant. So I suspect what you are is feast and famine. I call it feast and famine. So you're probably like, I started off as very much a spendy Wendy in my 20s. And then I grew into becoming a spreadsheet slave, and occasionally I slip back to being spendy Wendy. But the difference with spendy Wendy with me is that I do it from a position of strength and knowledge and more in control. So it's unlikely that spending I would do would ever throw me off track. Sometimes it has, but never like, in other words, the stakes when I go off track spending is much less now than it would have been when I was younger. So in other words, as you build wealth and as you build margin, and as you build some buffer into your life, and you've got a bit more margin, you can afford to be spendy because you're doing it from a position of knowledge. But if all you go through your life is just continually spending without understanding the implications, then that's when it can become an issue. Okay, so it looks like we've got spendy Wendy, followed by the jitterbug. Then the last one there, the ostrich, is the least favourable one. So that's interesting. Well, thank you for that, everyone.
It's really flickered between the 3 sessions. So earlier this morning, people thought they were spendy Wendy first, mostly, before we did the second bit then. And then it went to being a jitterbug was the other one. So it's really interesting to see how across the day people are getting different interpretations of what the words mean.
So before we go into it, have we got any questions that anyone wants me to answer?
We do have some questions, and keep adding them and upvoting them. So I think, you know, one of the big things a lot of people have and want to know is, how do you break out of bad spending habits? Like, we all can figure out which one of these personalities we are, and, you know, do this budget, do the spending plan, but like the bad habits of just tap card.
Well, we're going to touch base at the end before we finish on going over the smart spending system to remind people again. I've been doing this for years. Just talking about the framework, that's one thing. So making a start on understanding it's a spending plan, not a budget. Okay, it's a liberation framework tool, not a straitjacket. This is not about going without. It's about being conscious. It's not about as I say, cutting all the time. It's about being more thoughtful about what you do spend. So if you're going to have fun, if you're going to have some flexible spending, make sure you've made an allowance for it as opposed to just doing it willy-nilly. So it's about raising consciousness. And then the other thing I would say, the way that you break out of bad habits is to replace them with good habits. That's the simplest way. And create an environment and a situation around you which is more conducive to you doing more of the good habits than the bad habits. So, give you an example. We used to have the biscuit barrel next to the kettle in our kitchen. So it was very easy for me to make a cup of tea at night and have a chocolate biscuit. Okay. When I moved the biscuit barrel literally into our utility room, I'd have to physically go to the utility room to get the biscuit to bring it out because it was a trigger. Make a cup of tea, have a biscuit. So sometimes, same with your spending, same with your money decisions. So, for instance, one thing could be just to learn to say no more, yes less. And so, for instance, when you're, one of the things that we'll come on to that Claire recommends, and I've always proposed this for years, just learn to do the 24-hour rule. For instance, just take a breath, and when you're going to buy something, just give yourself 24 hours. Break the cycle between yes and doing it and putting it off. So replace it with a good thing, change your environment, use a framework, and more importantly, understand more about what's important to you.
Great. I suppose there's a question here around paying off your mortgage early or keeping the money in savings. Now, this is a big question at the moment because rates are fluctuating so much between savings and mortgage rates. What do you think people are better off doing at the moment?
Well, assuming you've got no mortgage debt, okay, so credit cards, overdrafts, loans, you've got rid of that. Assuming you have enough in your emergency fund, so this is not a sinking fund that you're going to use to pay for your holidays.
No, it's just extra money.
If it's extra money, then you have to weigh up between overpaying your mortgage and putting more in your pension, or doing other things with it, such as, you know, buying other investments or whatever. Overpaying your mortgage is a risk-free, tax-free return equal to the mortgage interest you're not paying. So if you're going to pay 5% mortgage interest, that's like earning 8% as a high rate taxpayer, or 6.5% if you're a basic rate taxpayer. The downside of overpaying your mortgage is you can't draw the money back. So obviously I can't give individual advice because everyone's different, but it depends how much flexibility you want, how much discipline you need, whether you're going to need the money for anything else, whether you pay high rate tax, whether you're going to get extra contributions from your employer to the pension. But I would strongly suggest that what you do is you compare overpaying the mortgage and say to yourself, I'm going to overpay the mortgage unless I have other things I need to spend the money on the next 2 to 3 years, unless I haven't got an adequate emergency fund, unless I can get higher rate tax on my pension contributions, unless there's something else I'm going to need savings for in the short term. But if you're in any doubt, talk to a mortgage broker or a financial advisor to get that sort of pros and cons. But it's now become much more attractive, particularly when you're paying 5, 5.5 or 6% rates. So let's move on and just explain some of these things, and then we'll dive back into some of the questions, so keep them coming. So, Spendy Wendy. The motto is, when the going gets tough, the tough go shopping. That's the motto. This could be you if you know the 3 digits on the back of your bank card off by heart, as you do so much online shopping. And someone in this room knows their credit card or debit card number, the whole number, off by heart.
Their full debit card number.
Yeah. Well done, Rachel. Personality traits. Often, spending money is about boosting our self-esteem. We can be convinced that buying a dress or shoes or a gadget or whatever will bring us happiness, but the buzz doesn't last for long. This could be connected to what we call status anxiety or low self-esteem. But whatever is driving the compulsion to spend and possibly build up debt risks blowing future happiness. So in other words, we have an issue between the implications of spending and the immediate impulse. The classic one is Deliveroo, right? Let's have that in an hour. A new habit to consider is have a spending plan. We're going to touch base on that in a minute. A less off-putting word than a budget. So I don't use the word budget, as you know. I use the word spending plan, have done for years. So we're not saying you can't spend, we're saying you have to be more conscious about your priorities of where you spend. And that will help give us some sort of limit or boundary. Fixing tangible savings goals could also help you learn to delay gratification. For instance, Claire says she always leaves items in her online shopping basket overnight, so by the time the morning comes, the urge to splurge has often gone. So that's Spendy Wendy. And just to touch base on this about what motivates us, so money motivation can be extrinsic or it can be intrinsic. Neither of them are good or bad. It doesn't mean you're going to spend money that you haven't got. But the point here is that extrinsic is spending is based on consumption, buying stuff, and external validation. Do people think good things of me? Am I going to look good? Status. So some of those lives you see on Instagram, some of them are actually real and some of them aren't. Intrinsic, now spending here is based on our values, what's important to us, and meaningful experiences. But just because you're intrinsically motivated, you can be buying lots of life experiences that are keeping you poor or putting you into debt.
You know, a meaningful experience is a really nice holiday.
Yeah.
But that could be too much money that you're
Yeah.
spending on it because
Yeah.
you've gone bougie for your holiday and not, you know, with your bank balance in mind.
That's right. And there's a great quote from Will Rogers, which in fact is Will Smith's favourite quote, the man in black. Too many people are buying things they can't afford with money they don't have to impress people that they don't like. And I would add, who don't care either. So just remember who you're trying to impress. Now, the Goblin, this is a good one. Their motto is money, my precious. So this could be you if you get more of a kick from saving money than spending it. The personality traits are that goblins are essentially frugal hoarders. They like counting their gold. They have a tendency to be money obsessed. They strongly associate money with security. Maybe there was not a lot of it around when they're growing up. They can struggle to take risks and may well have excessive amounts of cash in savings that risk being gobbled up by inflation, because in the long run, obviously, we're losing our purchasing power, which we all know about now. A new habit to consider there is giving yourself permission to enjoy some of the money you've worked so hard to earn. You'll find spending and investing easier if you do some cash flow planning first to show there's definitely enough slack in your spending plan, budget or lifetime situation. So have we got any questions there before we go on to the others?
We do have a few questions come in. I suppose this is a big, topic that we touched on earlier as well, is about partner and finances, really. So somebody's asked about having a joint emergency fund with your partner.
Yep.
Now, that talks about combining finances. You want to make sure that you're on the same page with where that money is going, how that money's spending. What would you what are your tips around dealing with that?
Well, you have to decide whether you're just dating with someone, whether you are just temporarily sharing accommodation with them, whether it's a long-term committed relationship, whether you're married or not. It's a difficult one. So some people in personal finance experts believe that you shouldn't be combining finances until you're married. Others live in the real world. I count myself in that. I live in the real world, but not everyone wants to get married, but they could be in very loving, long-term committed relationships that they don't choose not to do the marriage situation or the civil partnership. My feeling is that if you are, for all intents and purposes, in a long-term relationship, then we'll touch on the smart spending system in a minute. But I think having an emergency fund that represents an emergency fund for to the extent you're combining your finances, makes sense. But you may want to, if you're not married or you're not sure about how committed you want to be, you may want to have a separate emergency fund as well. But the two things should aggregate together. So in other words, don't double up, but you might have, let's say for instance, your optimal emergency fund might be £5,000 in an ideal world. Not saying you'll get there overnight, or you have to get there, but say it was 5,000, you might say, well, okay, 2,500 in our joint emergency fund, and I'll have 2,500 in my own name, or we'll each have 1,500, whatever. So there's no right and wrong, but make sure you have an emergency fund. That's the key.
I suppose it makes sense to have a joint emergency fund a little bit if, you're living together and you've got rent to cover. You can have enough there for a month or so's rent in case anything happens to both of your jobs. The current climate with redundancies and things all the time, that can happen. And, have something for yourself then that if you run into trouble or, you need to leave the relationship, you can rely on that yourself. We've got another couple before we move on. How do you get out of the loop of high monthly payments that cover your credit card debt?
Well, here's the thing. There gets a point. If you don't have an emergency fund and you have non-mortgage debt, then we really need to focus on really being very, very intentional, very, very focused, and really being they call it scorched earth theory, where essentially you really intensively, whether it's 2 months or 12 months, for a period, you try and earn as much money as you can, you try and spend as little as you can, you get rid of the debt, and you build up savings. And that, if you're in a relationship, you both get on the same page, but it does mean that you have to be really focused, but it's not forever. You can't maintain that kind of level of intensity, but it means you can't go out to eat. It means you can't go on holiday. You can't go socialising. You know, I know someone, Michelle McGrath, she wrote a book called A No Spending Year. For 1 year, her and her partner, Frank, did not spend any money. Even when they went out to see friends at the pub, they had a glass of water and would not let anyone buy them anything. They didn't buy toiletries. They got stuff for free. They went and worked at festivals. They had no spending. And from having no spare money, even though they earned reasonable money, they ended up with 30 or 40,000 pounds of saving, which they then used to pay down their mortgage. So it can be done, but it can't be sustained long term. So you need to do something. If you always did what you always did, you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. And what that means is you have to do something different. And certainly if it's a shock to the system, it's like having a cold shower. You can't do it forever, but it's what you need to do to get you moving. So there's no easy answer on this, but I think we better just answer some of the other questions, some of the other sections, and then we'll do some more questions. So the ostrich. Now the ostrich is I bury my head in the sand. This can be you if you say a silent prayer every time you tap your card to pay. Personality traits are, there are many emotional triggers for ostrich-type behaviour. It could stem from a bad experience in school, maths lessons, feeling unable to focus on finance because you're struggling with problems in other areas of your life, or feeling too embarrassed to ask for help. Deep down, ostriches know not staying on top of their finances comes at a cost, but their fear of getting to grips with their money is greater than their fear of losing out. So a new habit to consider is taking things one step at a time. Pick one thing to tackle with a deadline and a reward for completing the task. This could be something as small as checking your bank balance every day. Now, for many people, that could be a really big thing, you know, actually just looking and dealing with reality. I always say choose reality over delusion, okay? It's very important. But it does give you the confidence to move on to the next step. So if you're feeling scared, perhaps there's another ostrich person in your life that you could be, you know, money buddies with. I mean, it's possible, isn't it? So the ostrich situation, you know, you have to choose reality. Often it's not as bad as you think it is. Just confronting the situation doesn't mean it goes away. But like, as I always remember when I was doing my portfolio management exams years ago and doing all the advanced maths for it, which was really hard. And I can remember the tutor saying, there's a lot worse things out there than an investment management exams with advanced statistics. And I thought, really? And he said, yes. He said, there's a lot worse things. And once this is done, it's done. So again, I like to bring people, and that was really tough. I like people to realise that there's always something worse, and this too shall pass.
And I mean, you don't always have to go and look at every single aspect of your finances at the same time. Start with just looking at your bank account.
Yeah.
Then maybe your credit card.
Yeah.
Then maybe whatever else you've got. Like, don't have to do it all in
Small
one
is
day.
the new big. Small is the new big. We say tiny steps. A great book called Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, who is the absolute world's expert on behaviour change when it comes to habits. Not to be confused with other people who write about habits who've got no actual academic background. This guy's done all the research. He's done all the papers. BJ Fogg, brilliant. And what he says is small is the new big. If you focus on doing really small, then you feel a bit more confident and you make progress, and that's the key. So let's move on to the Spreadsheet Slave. This is an interesting one because I know you identified a bit with this, and I certainly do. Motto is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That's their motto. This could be you if you ever dream in Excel. Now, personality traits are they are not scared of running the numbers. Spreadsheet Slave sees money as a tool, which isn't actually a bad habit or a bad way of embracing money. Careful planners, their budgeting is always bang on, but in some cases they could be overcompensating for a lack of control in other areas of their life. Do you control your money or does your money control you? I know people, let me tell you now, more money is better than less money, right? All other things being equal. And generally speaking, the studies show that having a higher income or money does, all other things being, make you happier. But more and more money has less and less benefit to you as you go beyond a certain level. So in other words, you get less happiness for your money, but after you get beyond a certain level. But the point is, once money starts becoming the sole determinant of your value as a person, that's when it starts to have laws of diminishing return. Now, most people I meet, most people I speak to, most people I answer questions to, they're not in that situation. But what I'm saying is assume that more and more is going to radically change your happiness. But the point here is with a spreadsheet, it's good, but it should be a tool. So the habit to consider here is don't forget to have some fun. Plans are there to be adapted, or in the case of your spending plan, Rachel, to be broken. Yeah. True wealth is about much more than just money. We need to invest in our health, our relationships, and our friendships. Now, studies have shown that even if you have financial problems happening in your life, if you have good friends, good family, good support network, some form of support, a church or a community group or some buddies or friends in a group, you can actually navigate those things because you don't feel isolated, you feel on your own. And I know from the work I do at Citizens Advice, when I see people coming in there, all they needed was a friend to sort of explain things to them and give them a bit of support, and then they can go off and do stuff on their own. So again, spreadsheet's not the only thing. Now the final one, which is actually quite an interesting one, and I think this, now I explain it, it may have more resonance for our audience. Their motto is, yes, I mean no, I mean yes, I mean maybe. Okay? This could be you if you have a constant state of underlying anxiety about money. So what we're really talking there is about worry. We're worried, it's what could happen, not necessarily what is happening, but it's that low level, and it can be very debilitating. If you suffer from anxiety generally, it's a problem, but if you suffer from anxiety about money, it can really, really hold you back, and sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. Personality traits. In times like these, where we obviously have a cost of living sort of squeeze, everyone has the jitters about money, and having to survive on a low income is a fact of life rather than a personality trait. However, many jitterbugs feel underconfident with money and struggle to make decisions. Often their fear of making the wrong decision means they end up making no decision, which can cost them in the long run. In fact, I know some people who are jitterbugs who they do so much research, they forgot even what the question was they were researching. So a new habit to consider is try to focus on what you can control, not what you can't control. Giving voice to your fears could really help, such as a session with a money coach or a financial advisor or even a therapist or even a colleague, right? And here's the thing, whether you invest in a professional to help you or you work with a friend, the point here is that any decision, as long as you think it through and you're not being impulsive, is better than no decision. And as you say, if we can reduce our fear of getting things wrong, 2 steps forward, 1 step back is still forward, even if you feel like you're coming back. And the fact is, like, it's relatively new to you, this spending plan idea, Rachel. So the fact is you're not where you want to be with it. It doesn't mean you aren't making progress. You're now aware about it. You're now talking to your boyfriend about it. He's now aware of it. So before you know it, it's like if you buy a red BMW, you know what happened? You start noticing red BMWs, right? Having never noticed them before. If I bought a 3-wheeler car, I probably noticed all 3-wheeler cars that are out there. Not that there are many around, but I probably would because I'd be attuned to it. So give yourself time to work on that. So what I want to know now, having me described all those personality types, do you associate the most dominant one differently to when you did before? So are you a spendy Wendy, a goblin, spreadsheet slave, jitterbug, ostrich? Let's see if this is different. This is interesting. So
earlier it was split 28-28 by Spendy, Wendy and Jitterbug.
Yeah, but this morning it was jitterbug was the main one, wasn't it?
Yeah. It looks like
so this is interesting. So I'm wondering, so what was it earlier today?
It was Spendy, Wendy and Jitterbug tied at the top.
Let's just see. We'll give it a little bit of a nudge. So Spendy Wendy's in...
There's a lot more Spendy Wendy's on this afternoon's call, I think.
Mind you, in fairness, it maybe there tends to be more people at the back end of the live stream than at the beginning, isn't it? Maybe people have just joined us. So for anyone who's just joined us or didn't join us at the beginning, we asked this question at the beginning. So Spendy Wendy's right out there, closely followed by the jitterbug. Interesting. Good. So before we go into questions again, we've got some time for questions, another 15 minutes. I just want to go over the smart spending system. So the smart spending system, whether you use pen and paper, whether you use Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets, whether you use a budgeting app, if that works for you, go with it. This is just designed to convey to you a framework. It's not a straitjacket, it's a framework, it's a concept. And the 3 components of it are thinking of your spending in terms of different versions of you. So we've got the essential you, which is like, shelter, food, light, heat, transportation. That's just basically, opening the doors. Then there's the future you. So that is building wealth and getting rid of debt and building, financial resources. But it's now the future could be next month, could be next year, 5 years, 30 years. The vast majority of us are going to live beyond 65, okay? If you don't, then, you need to have a plan for it. But we don't know. We don't know how long we're going to live. We don't know when our time's up. But most of us are going to need to think of the future us. And here's the thing, your future you is getting nearer to you all the time. But in a way, they're always away from you. So this is an issue here. And then the fun you, this is the bit that often, particularly with the spendy wendies amongst us here,
It's my favourite
nothing
part.
wrong with fun. This is what makes life interesting. But the problem is it's when we aren't conscious about how much we're spending on fun, when we don't deliberately decide what job to give our money. The job of fun is going to cost me £300 a month, and this is how much, and this is how it affects my essential and my future you. What we mustn't do is have fun crowding out future, but equally, there's no point in putting all your money aside for the future if you have no fun. I mean, you hear of some people in this financial independence retire early movement, they live like frugal, like monks and nuns, and literally live on rice and beans forever on the basis that they want to be financially independent so that they can give up work. Now, I think that's just too extreme for me and most people because, what if you suddenly do get a health issue in your 50s and you've had no fun? All you've been doing is building up your wealth. So we're all different. For them, it's right. But the point here is about being conscious about it. And that's the aspect of it. And these are just percentages just to give you an idea that if all you're doing is spending all your money in essentials, that's going to affect and crowd out your future. If all you're doing is spending all your money on fun, that might affect your essentials. It will certainly affect your future. So the other issue here is there's two accounts I want to point out here. There's the emergency fund, which is completely separate from day to day and from fund spending and from this account called the smoothing account. And if you're not where you want to be with your emergency fund, either because you've got to pay off debts or because you're still saving towards that, then that's going to be work in progress, okay? Progress rather than perfection. But the smoothing account is just a holding pen. Think of it like this. It's a bit like your water butt. The water butt fills up when it's raining, and then when it's dry and there's no rain, we let some water out and we draw that out on the dry days. But the point here is smoothing account. This is for all of the items that we're going to make a monthly allowance for. And I'm going to go with this. So think about your hair. You have your hair cut. Very nice it is as well. But you have your hair cut and you were spending, every couple of months you were spending 50, 60 quid on a trim.
Yeah.
But you weren't putting aside 25, 30 quid in a smoothing account. If you had, you'd have the money to draw on. So in other words, you're parking money each month for things that are going out not every month. So it might be every 2 months. It might be every year. It might be every quarter. It might be every 6 months. This is the thing that makes the difference. This is how it makes it easier parking the money. But you only know that if you get the truth, if you get head out the sand, if you stop, take a breath, take a step back, get the truth of where it's all going first. And the smoothing account is the thing that helps you develop the habit. And developing this habit, if you get a pay rise, if you have a bonus, if you've had some expense stop. I had a life insurance policy, came to an end. I didn't take the money and spend it. I just put it into my investment account. Just directed the money into my investment account. Forget about it, as if I've never had it. Okay? So the smart spending system is just designed to give you that sort of framework. And you can download that from the Learn website. So let's go back to questions.
Yeah. And I just want to say on the spending system as well, like as Jason mentioned, I am quite new to the whole thing. And it kind of got introduced to me in January in our budgeting one we've done, which is available on the Learn website as well. And it might seem a bit like overwhelming at the beginning, or it's a bit frightening to look at where exactly your money is going. But, I'm a couple of months in now and I feel definitely a little bit more in control, a little less of a spendy Wendy times. But it definitely, makes you feel a little bit better about where you are, helps control like the anxiety around money. And you can download a PDF from our Learn website with the different parts of the accounts and the percentages of which goes into what, and helps you set out make a plan for it.
And the good thing about this also is this is a good talking point for getting on the same page if you have a partner, getting on the same page with your partner without being judgmental. And one of the things to bear in mind with this is that this is like, think of it like this. You start off, no one's taught this, right? You start off, all you're trying to put some boundaries, some framework, and it's okay to spend, might take you 2 years to refine this. It's never going to be perfect. You'll have times when you go off piste, but don't feel shame or guilt or frustration with yourself. Remember, you're learning a new skill. You're learning a new habit. If you spend as much time building your smart spending plan and monitoring it and refining it and improve it, if you spend a little bit of time each week, as much of that as you do on Instagram or YouTube or Netflix, and I'm not trying to be sanctimonious because I love all those things, but the point is, if you spend as much time, I will typically do a bit of personal finance and say, okay, now I'm going to watch a series of whatever it is, The Gentleman or something on Netflix or whatever other ones are available. But something, a little bit of a guilty pleasure, something I want to watch. But I've said to I've just had to do all my tax return data gathering for my accountant. Oh my God, boring as hell. But I said to myself, I'll do that in sections over 3 nights, and then I'll just watch half an hour of something, right? And then I'll go and read a book. So I try and give myself little carrot and stick things. I find it as hard as anyone, but the point is I've learnt these habits. So what other questions we got there?
So we've got plenty of questions for the next couple of minutes.
Yep.
You can still send in more. Make sure you upvote the ones you really want us to answer. So I think a lot of people, myself, are very guilty of this, is you save at the beginning of a month with, very good intentions while allowing yourself some money for spending as well. You think, I'll probably spend about, 200-300 quid this month on random things. But you end up spending more and you have to dip into your savings. So then your savings go down and you're still not where your emergency fund is. What tips do you have for people to kind of control that spending cycle?
Right, okay. It depends whether you are in what we call deep shock situation, where what you have to do is have a major change to your circumstances. So if you have non-mortgage debt and or no emergency fund at all, then this is serious. You have to say, you literally have to have scorched earth. It's horrible, it's not fun, it's not nice. If there's people going on stag do's, people getting married abroad, you just have to say no to all of it. It's hard. You just have to tell people, look, I love you. I think you're lovely people. I just can't do that at the moment. I'm trying to get ahead financially and I can't do it. Okay? I love you. I want to come out the other side. It's only going to be 6 to 9 months. Can you please bear with me? I'll be with you. I know it's tough. I know it's hard. But people who really, and now obviously, I'm not saying don't go on an event or don't get to someone's wedding. But, if it's in Mauritius and you're trying to get out of debt and build savings, you can't go. You can attend via Zoom. And I know loads of people who do this. They're not going to miss you. You can attend virtually. So the point is, if you're in that situation where you are needing to deep shock your finances, you have to be literally no to everything. You have to do what Michelle McGrath in that book said, My No Spending Year. She just basically went hardcore, cold turkey. Now, if you're not in that position, you've built a bit of savings, you've got a plan to get rid of your debt, you're using the debt snowball, whatever it is, you're starting to make progress, but you're not where you want to be, and you keep you're taking 3 steps forward and 3 steps back, and you don't feel like you're making progress. Then what you have to do is look at where is it the money's leaking from? Where is it leaking? If that's the case, then what you have to do, for instance, the way I quarantined my ad hoc spending, I use a phone and a card for fun spending, my coffees and things, but it goes into one account. So it goes into a separate account on my phone. And so like this morning when I came in and got something to eat here, that comes out of that fund. So I put an amount in there. Now, when it's starting getting dangerously low, I sort of say, well, no, I'll go to the kitchen and get one of those coffees. They're not as nice, but I'm not going to go and move money from my savings account. Or I might think, okay, I'll have breakfast before I leave this morning. I won't go and get something on the way. So in other words, it's by using the smart spending system, you're just creating these little silos of money. Now, making mistakes in the early days, you may never keep to this budget to start with, but what you're doing is you're going through the process of building it. Now, what most people do is they build an unrealistic budget that bears no relation, and I'm assuming not in what I call you have to go scorched earth. I'm saying you're just not making progress, and that is because you are still in the old way of I tap, I buy, I this, I that, I scroll on Instagram, I say yes, I've got stuff in a cart, I've got all my cards loaded. It's so, how easy is it for you to spend versus how easy is it for you to save?
I definitely did the wrong expectation of how much I'd spend in January. When I redid it for January, I was like, oh, I think January, no social engagements, I'm only in the office 2 days a week, I could spend, this amount. And then, first go went horribly wrong. Second go, February, went much better.
But here's the thing, Rachel. If you could just balance your spending plan for 2 or 3 months, that's progress. In other words, not taking on any debt and not dipping into savings. That's the first thing. Then once you've got that right, then say, okay, now I've got to try and create £50, £60, £100 of savings a month. If you did 50 1 month or whatever. And then move. So in other words, get stable. So either if it's really a problem, you've got massive debt and no savings, you've got to go scorched earth, no to everything. Then it's, okay, let's stabilise the spending plan. So what's coming in is going out. I'm not building, I'm not going backwards. Then, once you've got that stable and you've got used to that muscle, that spending muscle, no, yes, less, no more, I'm sorry I can't come out tonight. No, I'm not doing that. Do you want to come round and bring some friends? Just and share this with your friends. Say, do you know what? I'm into building. I've got myself a target. I want to build up £10,000 of savings, safety net. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm up for. So just want to let you know I'm going to be saying, you know, and share it with people, and they will understand. It's a bit like a friend of mine's an alcoholic. Okay, so I wouldn't dream of ever wanting to meet him in a bar. You know, it wouldn't be a good place for him to be. It would be unreasonable for him. So I'd meet him for a coffee somewhere. You know, and there was coffee bars you can go to at night and stuff like that. So I wouldn't put him in, or I'd meet in a hotel where a drink wasn't the main thing. You know, it would be okay and he'd feel comfortable. It wasn't a bar near him. So again, get your friends to realise that you're not a big spender. And this is not a sign of weakness. This is a sign of someone who's really showing leadership in their life. And actually, you know, having a car that's paid off is more important than having the car, right? You know, as I say, you know, having no payments is just a wonderful position to be in. Meaning that when you can put your hands on a lump of money for that emergency thing that happens, it's just an inconvenience. It's not the end of the world.
I suppose talking about lumps of money to have for an emergency, how do you work out how much is enough? Like, and especially if you're a worrier about money or somebody like a goblin mentality, or, you know, you're always a bit nervous about the upper limit or having a limit or having enough. How do you figure out the right amount, like between having a base emergency fund and then savings that make you feel very comfortable?
Well, I'm a goblin, right? So I do have that goblin characteristic now. So I would start feeling uncomfortable if I had less than 12 months of core living costs. But there's two things here. The lower you can keep your core living costs, which is why it's so important to avoid monthly payments and taking on liabilities and things like that, is the lower your living costs, the lower amount you need in your emergency fund. So the lower fixed living costs you've got, the less money you need in your emergency fund. The higher the living cost, the bigger you need. But whether you have 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, or 1 month, it depends on your preferences, it depends on your circumstances, and it depends on how important that is to give you financial peace. So just to have an emergency fund in the early days for me was like a major thing. To stabilise my spending so that I had not any more going out than coming in, for me was a win. And then starting to build some emergency savings, that was kind of, okay, I built it up to a couple of thousand, then it went back down to 500, then it went to 2.5. But I was still making progress. And here's the thing, an emergency fund, it's okay to use an emergency fund as long as it's an emergency, and a Deliveroo on a Friday night is not an emergency, okay? So I would say start with the figure that feels at least you've made some progress. So Dave Ramsey in the US is a big American sort of Christian gun-totting finance expert. And he's had this thing of the baby steps for years where he says, you know, before you pay off debt, get £1,000 together, or $1,000 in a starter fund for emergencies. And the idea is not that it's enough, but it's just to prove to yourself you can build £1,000 together. Then pay off your debt, then build an amount that's at least 3 months, but ideally 6 and possibly 12. But don't worry if you don't get there. Just having £2,000 or £3,000 of emergency savings and no debt other than your mortgage or your rent, that's a win.
Yeah. I think we have one little activity for you guys to do just before we go. So this is a bit different. It's not a poll. It's a word cloud. Am I right in saying that, Jason? So what we want to know from you is, what action will you take now? So you can pop in words like spending plan, or, you know, if you just take anything from this, what do you think, how the session
We've had this twice today, and we've been blown away by how many people have participated. And it'd be interesting to see. Oh, there we go. This was the #1 word that people put in. This is really interesting. It'd be interesting to see how many people engage with.
Be less jitterbug. I like that.
Oh, yeah, I like it. Emergency fund. Love it. So the point is, this gets bigger. The more people that do the same thing or similar, it gives precedence. So it's giving us an idea of what. This is brilliant, isn't it? Let's see if we get the same level of engagement as we've had before. This is wonderful. We love this because this is giving us the feedback immediately as to, first of all, that we've had an impact with people, but secondly, that you know what the next step is. And this is the next step, you know, between now and say Sunday. Just think small. Doesn't have to be big, does it? And it might be you do the same thing the week after. So are you impressed here, Rachel? They're very engaged.
Learn to say no is a different one from earlier.
Yeah,
you know, that's picking up quite a bit above emergency fund.
Yeah. And it's okay to say no, right? It's okay to say no.
Clearing debt, I mean, it is such a great thing to do because the less payments you have on your
Yep.
debt, you know, the more money you have towards savings or just generally like easing your own life. You know, being free of payments, as you mentioned earlier, is something that, you know, I think everyone should try and strive towards.
I think this one, try to earn more to eliminated debt. I think they mean debt. To eliminate debt. I think that's what they mean. But so,
Probably.
look, thank you, everyone. That's brilliant, isn't it, Rachel?
Yeah. And we just want to say thank you so much for joining us today and all your participation in the polls and the questions. Any questions that haven't been answered, we're going to do a wrap up and answer them, and we'll share them with your employers later. If you want to learn more about the spending plan or watch any of our previous webinars where Jason and I went through the spending plan in really big detail, or download the PDF with the spending plan information, all available on learn.salaryfinance.com.
And we also got the budget briefing and the new tax year briefing. So we've done a really simple briefing note for what the budget means to you and what the new tax year means to you, with loads of resources and links.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jason, for putting all of this together, and thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.